Thank you for downloading the book from the royalib.com free library, http://royalib.com. All books by the author, http://royalib.com/author/Ivanov_S.html. The same book in other formats, http://royalib.com/R39_S/R-Detali_constructs-I.html. Enjoy reading. SV Ivanov. P-39 Airacobra. Modifications and design details. War in the Air 91. War in the Air No. 91, 2001 periodical popular science publication for members of military history clubs. Editor-compiler Ivanov SV with the participation of Ars LLC. License LV No. 35 dated 29 August 1997. Copyright Ivanov SV, 2001. The publication does not contain propaganda and advertising. Printed in the Printing House Nota, Beloretsk Street, Soviet 14 circulation. 300 copies. Introduction. The Airacobra fighter is one of the most successful aircraft of the Second World War period in its class. At the same time, the P-39 and the most controversial fighter of that period, spears are still being broken in the United States about its advantages and disadvantages. It was developed as a high-speed interceptor, hence the exceptionally powerful armament, a 37 mm automatic cannon, whose high explosive shells could break almost any aircraft into components. After flight testing of the XP-39 prototype, the U.S. Army Air Corps allowed the turbocharger to be removed from the aircraft. At low and medium altitudes, this device did not bring tangible benefits, but at high altitudes it significantly increased the LTX of the aircraft. In the West, great importance was attached to the altitude of fighters, so the decision to remove the turbocharger looks rather strange. Not surprisingly, many Cobra operators, especially the British, spoke poorly about the flight characteristics of the R-39 fighter. The Cobra was not popular with pilots. Powerful cannon armament turned the fighter into an outstanding attack aircraft, and the machine does not need altitude to attack ground targets. The unbowed armament of the Cobra made it possible to hit even armored targets. In the Red Army Air Force, hundreds of Cobras were successfully used as attack aircraft. At the same time, the Soviet Cobras also proved themselves to be excellent fighter aircraft, on which many outstanding aces fought. The turbocharger appeared on the P-63 King Cobra fighter, while the high-altitude characteristics of the King Cobra improved dramatically compared to the J-1TX of the P-39 aircraft. However, the King Cobras were widely used by the Russians and the French to attack ground targets. As part of the USAF, the King Cobras were used in an extremely unusual role as man-target aircraft for training in real firing of aerial gunners of bombers. The P-63 aircraft from the USAF did not take part in the hostilities. The careers of the Airacobra and the King Cobra turned out to be relatively short, but bright. Front view of the P-39 D-1B Airacobra fighter. The aircraft had very clean aerodynamic shapes. This version of the Cobra is armed with a long-barreled central 20 mm cannon, instead of the usual 37 mm cannon for most modifications. History of creation. In 1935, the chief engineer of the newly formed Bell Aircraft Corporation, Robert J. Woods, visited a shooting demonstration at the U.S. Army's firing range in Aberdeen, PC, Maryland. Woods was most impressed by the American Armament Corporation's 37 mm cannon. It was decided to install this gun on the first aircraft designed by Bell, the Airacobra FM-1 fighter. By the standards of the 30s, the aircraft came out too bulky and oversized. Woods believed that interceptors should be armed with 37 mm cannons, since the high explosive projectiles of these cannons had a very large destructive power. Bell Aircraft. The chief engineer designed a single-engine monoplane of exceptionally clean aerodynamic shapes, and the design was carried out literally around the 37 mm gun. An aircraft equipped with a turbocharger was calculated to reach a maximum speed of about 400 miles per hour. Woods believed that it did not make sense to synchronize the firing of a gun with a low rate of fire with the rotation of the propeller. In his opinion, the best solution was to pass the gun barrel through the hollow shaft of the propeller gearbox, in which case the need to synchronize shots and propeller rotation simply disappeared. Messerschmitt's engineers did the same by installing the Bf-109 20mm cannon firing through the propeller shaft. It was easier for German engineers; they could place a gun in the collapse of the cylinders of a V-shaped fighter engine. Engines of American design did not allow doing a similar trick. Woods decided to put the gun behind the engine. The first detailed version of the layout of the future Airacobra is known as Model 3. The layout commission for the Model 3 took place on the 24th of May, 1937. The commission was not satisfied with the poor view from the cockpit, which was strongly shifted back. Woods made a truly revolutionary decision by moving the engine behind the cab. The new layout caused a wave of criticism. Skeptics pointed to an excessively long drive shaft from the engine to the gearbox, saying that the length of the shaft would contribute to premature breakdowns. These fears were not subsequently confirmed. The danger of a forced landing on an aircraft with the engine located behind the cockpit was pointed out. The engine could break off the mounts when it touched the ground roughly and crush the pilot. Again, the history of the use of Cobras refuted the fears of spiteful critics. On the 7th of October, 1937, the U.S. Art Command ordered one XP-39 prototype, serial number 38-326, at Bell. This machine received the name Model 4. Thanks to the successful layout with the cockpit located between the armament in the forward fuselage and the engine in the middle, the aircraft turned out to be well balanced in terms of weight. The cross-section of the fuselage turned out to be small, and the widest part of the fuselage was in its middle, a favorable fact from the point of view of aerodynamics. The use of countersunk rivets contributed to an additional reduction in aerodynamic drag. The designers had reason to expect to obtain a maximum horizontal flight speed of the order of 400 miles per hour. The tricycle landing gear with a nose strut added to the unusualness of the aircraft. Such a landing gear was preferable to a landing gear with a tail support in the case of aircraft operation from unpaved airfields. Rolled out of the factory floor, the aircraft made an impression on representatives of the U.S. Army. XP-39 was the smallest of all American fighters during the Second World War. On the 6th of April, 1938, test pilot Jimmy Taylor took off the XP-39 for the first time from the ground. The first flight took place at Wright Field, PC, Ohio. The turbocharged fighter jet accelerated from 20,000 feet to 390 miles per hour, though the aircraft was unarmed and had limited fuel. However, it became apparent that after making some changes to the design, the car is quite capable of breaking the 400 mile per hour milestone. In the original configuration of the XP-39, a large turbocharger air intake was installed on the port side of the fuselage. Note also the wide propeller blades and the tall canopy. According to the results of purges in the NASA wind tunnels in Langley, PCS, Virginia, the plane was redesigned. The picture shows a modified XP-39V. The U.S. Army Air Corps also allowed the turbocharger to be removed, which led to a decrease in speed at high altitudes. The carburetor air intake was moved behind the cockpit canopy, so its location has become standard for all modifications of the Airacobra. A total of 13 YP-39 prototypes were built, all of which flew under the flight test program. The YP-39 is almost identical to the XP-39, but most of the YP-39s were armed. The plane was blown through the NASA wind tunnel in Langley, PC, Virginia. Based on the results of the purges, it became possible to improve the aerodynamics of the aircraft, in particular, to refine the shape of the cockpit canopy by reducing the height of the canopy and increasing the length. Meanwhile, Army officials have suggested ditching the turbocharger. Woods protested strongly, pointing out the depravity of the non-turbocharged fighter interceptor concept. The Army command did not want to listen to the arguments of the designer. The military had its own reason. They no longer saw an interceptor, but an aircraft capable of attacking ground targets from low altitudes. Interceptors, they say, America are not required, since the country is surrounded by oceans, which will become an obstacle for any bomber. In such reasoning, the need to have an interceptor capable of protecting our own ground forces somewhere in the overseas theater of operations was somehow overlooked. Air battles between fighters did not attach any importance at all. The U.S. Art Command has identified two main priorities: bombers and fighters capable of striking ground targets. This approach led to the disappearance of the XP-39 turbocharger. XP-39 became not a fighter interceptor. After removing the turbocharger and making changes to the design, the designation of the prototype changed to XP-39B. Flight tests showed an apparent drop in performance at altitudes above 15,000 feet due to the removal of the turbocharger. In the fall of 1940, the delivery of a batch of 13 pre-production YP-39s began, the first of which was handed over to the customer on the 12th of October. It was assumed that a turbocharger would be installed on one of the YP-39s. The aircraft was to be designated YP-39A, but this did not happen. The first production version of the Airacobra was the R-39C. Fighters of this modification were used for the conduct of military tests as part of the 31st Pursuit Group. The group was stationed at the Selfridge Field Airfield, PC, Michigan. The P-39S differed from all subsequent models of the Airacobra by the presence of two rifle-caliber machine guns in the forward fuselage along with a pair of heavy machine guns and a 37mm cannon. On later Cobras, there were only 3 firing points in the nose of the fuselage, 2 machine guns and a cannon. The first production version was the R-39S, only 20 of them were made. All unbowed weapons on this modification were concentrated in the nose of the fuselage, a 37mm cannon, 2 12.7mm machine guns and 2 7.62mm machine guns. A total of 80 P-39Cs were ordered, but the last 60 were built as P-39Ds. Pictured is a P-39D from the 31st Fighter Group, Selfridge Field, PC, Michigan. The P-39N modification is the last of the 4 medium Cobra models, which, in addition to the one, included the P-39K, P-39L and P-39K. Initially, all 4 modifications were ordered as P-39G, but as a result, they were built in 4 versions. P-39N IB fighter photographed at Gray Field, PC, Washington. At this time, France ordered 200 Airacobras. They did not manage to fulfill the order, since France was occupied by Germany at an accelerated pace. The French order was added to the 475 P-39s ordered by the UK. At the beginning, these machines were named Caribous, but then the British decided to keep the original American name for the fighter. The British demanded that the 37mm lighter and faster-firing 20mm Hispano cannons be replaced, which also had a higher muzzle velocity. In a short time, a squadron was formed in the RAF from the first Cobras received from the USA. The negative experience of operating the Airacobra in this unit forced the British to cancel the unfulfilled part of the order. First of all, the low altitude of the fighter was criticized. In Britain, as well as at Bell, they did not understand the requirements of the USARC command to remove the turbocharger from the XP-39. The Soviet Union received 212 Airacobras from the British order, USARC 179 aircraft. British Cobras received the designation R-400 in the USA. Most of the P-400s were used in the Southwest Pacific, where there was an urgent need for any fighter. Meanwhile, 60 aircraft ordered by the U.S. Army were delivered in the P-39D variant. They were followed by P-39D-1B and P-39D-2B armed with 20mm cannons, like the Airacobra I and P-400. In the first months of 1942, a number of squadrons operating in the Pacific were armed with a mixed fleet of P-400, P-39D-1B and P-39D-2B fighters. The American Airacobras received their baptism of fire as part of the 8th Pursuit Group in March 1942. In May 1942, the name of the fighter air groups of the U.S. Army Air Corps changed. Instead of Pursuit they became Fighter. The same thing happened to the fighter squadrons. The second group to test the Airacobra in combat was the 35th Fighter Group in July 1942. Then the Cobras from the 347th Fighter Group went into battle. These aircraft retained the camouflage coloring adopted by the RAF. From August 1942, P-39D-1Bs operated over Guadalcanal as part of the 347th Fighter Group. The experience of the combat use of the Airacobra showed that the fighter is an excellent dive bomber and attack aircraft, but it is not capable of conducting air combat on an equal footing with the Japanese Zero. The 54th Fighter Group included the 56th, 57th, and 42nd Fighter Squadrons. Until 1943, the group was based in Alaska. The 18th Fighter Squadron from the 343rd Fighter Group also took part in repulsing the Japanese invasion of the Aleutians. On the opposite side of the globe, The Airacobras of the 33rd Fighter Squadron of the 342nd Composite Group carried a combat watch in Icelandic airspace. The 31st, 81st, 332nd, 350th, and 354th Fighter Groups armed with Airacobras fought in North Africa and Italy. In 1941 to 1943 Airacobras were also in service with squadrons stationed in the Panama Canal zone and in Central America, including the 22nd and 23rd Squadrons of the 36th Fighter Group, the 52nd Squadron of the 32nd Fighter Group and the 24th, 28th, 29th, 30th, 31st, 32nd, 43rd, 51st Squadron XXVI Fighter Command. In addition to the units of the first line, the Airacobras were in service with many training squadrons stationed on the continental United States. 4,746 Airacobras were delivered to the Soviet Union under Lend-Lease. It was the Soviet Cobras that wrote the brightest pages in the biography of the aircraft. Stubborn Americans do not get tired of writing about the successful use of the Airacobra on the Eastern Front to fight the German ground forces. Probably the names of Pokrishkin, Richkalov, Giliv mean little to them. Meanwhile, these names were very well known in the United States during the Second World War. The Bell Company understood a lot about advertising, and Pokrishkin, Richkalov, Giliv did advertising for the Airacobra. During the Second World War, Airacobras were also in service with the Air Force of Free France and Australia, and since 1943, and in service with the Italian Air Force that joined the Allies. 18 Airacobras from the 81st USAF Fighter Group were interned in Portugal after a forced landing. These aircraft entered service with the Air Force of the Pyrenean State. The latest and most successful version of the Airacobra was the P-39Q, the most massive modification. 4,905 Sawa-built Cholits wing machine guns of a rifle car. The muzzle on the P-39Q was replaced with underwing gondolas with 12.7 mm machine guns. As part of the USRs, the P-63 fighters did not take part in the battles. Specially modified King Cobras provided practical training for air gunners of bombers. King Cobras were used as targets. The composition and placement of the fighters' armament was changed to the P-400 and P-39D. 2 rifle-caliber fuselage machine guns were not installed, but 4 wing-mounted machine guns of the same caliber appeared. This composition of weapons remained unchanged on all Airacobras, except for the P-39Q. On the latest modification of the Airacobra, the P-39Q, there were no wing machine guns, but it was allowed to install one container with a heavy machine gun under each plane. The design of the aircraft has undergone not so many changes on the way from P-39D to P-39Q. The main difference was the equipment of the next model of the aircraft with the next model of the Allison V1710 engine. Already the first experience of the combat use of the Airacobra clearly demonstrated the erroneous decision of the USAAC command to remove the turbocharger from the aircraft. In February 1941, the military corrected the error by suggesting that Bell develop an improved model of a fighter with a turbocharger. The result was the beginning of the design of a fighter, which later received the name P-63 King Cobra. The data necessary for the design were obtained as a result of flight tests of 3 specially modified experimental XP-39E. An order for the manufacture of one XP-63 prototype was received by Bell on the 27th of June, 1941, and another prototype aircraft was ordered later. Both XP-63s were converted from the XP-39E, but the XP-63A was built from scratch. The XP-63 was first flown on the 7th of December 1942 by Bell's senior test pilot Robert M. Stanley. In addition to the turbocharger, the King Cobra had a number of other fundamental innovations: a laminar wing, a 4-bladed propeller. The tail of the fighter was completely redesigned, the elevators and ailerons received metal sheathing, the rudder sheathing remained linen. In terms of size, the King Cobra turned out to be much larger than the Airacobra. The R-63 King Cobra fighter was built in 2 main modifications. The first model was the R-63A fighter. 1,725 aircraft were built. The XP-63B program was cancelled, so the R-63C became the second main model. 1,227 aircraft of this variant were manufactured. The main external difference between the R-63C and the R-63A was the ventral fin, which improved the directional stability of the aircraft. King Cobras of both modifications developed a maximum speed of 400 miles per hour, which put the P-63 on a par with the fastest fighters of that time. In the United States, a large number of King Cobras were used in a highly unusual role as manned targets. The target planes were specially armored, after which the air gunners of the bombers worked out their training on them. Target aircraft were fired with bullets with fragile cores, which, when they collided with an obstacle, literally shattered into dust. The bullets left colored marks on the target skins, as they were equipped with a special coloring composition. By such marks on the ground it was easy to determine the effectiveness of one or another airshooter. Target aircraft were nicknamed Pine Ball. The pilots of these aircraft believed that playing the role of targets was no more dangerous than making a routine training flight. King Cobras of the Pine Ball variant were also used as towed unmanned targets. As part of the USAF squadrons, not a single King Cobra took part in the battles. The Glory Bird was successfully ripped off by all sorts of Mustangs with Thunderbolts. Most of the King Cobra 2,421 of the 3,303 built under the Lend-Lease program were delivered to the Soviet Union. In the USSR, R-63 fighters were used to attack German troops retreating to the west. However, on the Eastern Front, the King Cobra did not get the glory it was supposed to be in general. 300 King Cobras were handed over to the French. In 1948 the French King Cobras fought in Indochina. Neither the Airacobra nor the King Cobra received such wide popularity in the West as the same Mustang. Cobras are constantly criticized by all sorts of connoisseurs and historians. In most cases, critics fall on the low altitude of the aircraft. But what does the Bell Company have to do with it? Criticism should be redirected to the military, who forced the removal of the turbocharger from the XP-39. Supporters of the Airacobra do not get tired of praising the remarkable qualities of the aircraft in operations against ground troops. Some connoisseurs added to the fact that they declared both Cobras attack aircraft A-10A during the Second World War. Interestingly, these experts generally imagine what an attack aircraft is, and what kind of aircraft should IL-2 be considered then. Both critics and non-critics seem to have very little idea of how the Cobras fought on the Soviet-German front. Mustangs simply never dreamed of such successes. One advanced comrade concluded his monograph complimentary to the Cobra with the phrase, "They, P-39 and P-63, did not gain fame, but thanks to these aircraft we have what we have." It seems that the fighters were not lucky to show their combat qualities, but the design potential. Who? Regarding the glory of the R-39 fighter, read Pokorishkin's memoirs. But, oddly enough, the Airacobra did not have much influence on the development of the aircraft industry. The chassis with a nose strut during the war years was not only on the Airacobra, but the same Mustang, as well as the King Cobra, had a wing with a laminar profile. A total of 3,303 King Cobras were built, 2,421 of which were delivered to the Soviet Union. As part of the Red Army Air Force, the Airacobras and King Cobras were effectively used to attack the German troops. The aircraft had a standard A. Cherokee coloration, dirty olive top and neutral gray bottom. France received about 300 King Cobras. The XFL-1 Aeroboneta aircraft had much in common with the Airacobra, but was much smaller and much lighter. In addition, the chassis Aeroboneta was traditional for the 30s, a tricycle with a tail support. XFL-1 Aeroboneta Bell took part in the competition for a carrier-based fighter for the U.S. Navy Air Force, offering the XFL-1 Aeroboneta aircraft. The Aeroboneta design had much in common with the Airacobra design. At the same time, it is wrong to consider the XFL-1 as simply a clone of the XP-39B. One experimental XFL-1 was ordered by the Navy on the 8th of November, 1938, and the aircraft received registration number 1588. The Aeroboneta was the first American carrier-based fighter since 1928 to be equipped with a liquid-cooled inline engine. Brian Sparks first took the Aeroboneta into the sky on the 13th of May, 1940. The Aeroboneta wing area was larger than the XP-39B wing area, the fuselage was shorter, and the cockpit was higher for better visibility during takeoff and landing from an aircraft carrier. The most important difference is the tailwheel landing gear, an urgent need for a carrier-based aircraft of that period. The transfer of the landing gear from nose to tail led to a lot of serious alterations in the design of the machine, so measures had to be taken to shift the center of gravity. To ensure the stability of the aircraft on the ground, the struts of the main landing gear were moved forward, due to which the niches of the main supports began to block the channels of the air ducts of the oil and water coolers. For this reason, instead of air intakes in the wing socks, underwing air intakes were mounted on the aerobonite. For installation on the XFL-1 aircraft, the Allison XV-1710-6 engine without a turbocharger was chosen. Initially, the following armament was considered: a 23mm Madsen cannon and 2 synchronous rifle caliber machine guns. Later it was decided to install a heavy machine gun instead of a cannon. The 3 machine gun version of the armament, with 2 rifle caliber machine guns, should be considered completely inadequate. However, on the Airacobra build, the weapon still did not stand. A small Bell fighter lost in the competition to the heavy and powerful Chance Vogue Corsair. The Corsair became the first fighter aircraft to reach 400 miles per hour in level flight. Number of build: PCS-1 armament, not installed, 1 heavy machine gun, 2 rifle caliber machine guns. Engine: Allison V1710-6 power, HP 1150, maximum speed, miles per hour 338 miles per hour at 11,000 feet, climb 10,000 feet in 3.8 minutes. Service ceiling 30,900 feet, maximum flight range, miles 1072, combat flight range, miles 965, wingspan, foot 35, length 29 feet 9 inches, height 12 feet 9.5 inches, empty weight 5,161 pounds, gross weight 6,651 pounds, max takeoff weight 7,212 pounds. The success of the heavier and more powerful Chance Vogue F4U Corsair fighter put an end to the history of the XFL-1 Airacobra. Airacobra was the last Cherokee aircraft with vertical red, white and blue stripes on the rudder. In the original configuration, the XP-39 aircraft had a high cockpit canopy, which was later replaced by a lower one based on the results of blowdowns in the NACA wind tunnels. Modifications of the R-39 Airacobra XP-39. Immediately after the final decision was made regarding the layout of the aircraft, the Buffalo, New York plant began construction of a single XP-39 prototype, serial number 38-326. After assembly, the prototype was transported to Wright Field Air Force Base, PCS, Ohio, where the aircraft made its first flight on 6 April, 1938. Equipped with an Allison V1710-17 engine with a power of 1,150 HP and turbocharged, an experienced fighter at an altitude of 20,000 feet reached a maximum level flight speed of 390 miles per hour, an excellent result even taking into account the absence of weapons and incomplete refueling. At first, the XP-30 had a tall canopy with a thin binding. The air intakes of the turbocharger, oil cooler and water cooler were located on the sides of the fuselage immediately behind the cockpit. The fuselage was divided into 2 parts: the front, from the nose, cockpit and engine compartment, and the back, the tail itself. The radio equipment was mounted in the tail section of the fuselage. The first test flights revealed a shortage in performance compared to the calculated ones. It was necessary to improve the aerodynamics of the aircraft. XP-39 moved to Langley, PC, Virginia, for blowdowns in the NACA full-scale wind tunnel. Based on the results of the purges, the XP-39 was converted into the XP-39B. Number of build: PCS-1 armament, not installed, Allison V1710-17 engine power, HP 1150, maximum speed, miles per hour 390 miles per hour at 20,000 feet, climb 20,000 feet in 5 minutes. Service ceiling, foot 32,000, maximum flight range, miles 1,400, combat flight range, miles 390, wingspan, foot 35 feet 10 in. Length 28 feet 8 inches, height 11 feet, empty weight 3,995 pounds, gross weight 5,550 pounds, max takeoff weight 6,204 pounds. The maximum capacity of the internal fuel tanks is 200 gallons. Maximum capacity of external fuel tanks. The picture clearly shows other external differences of the XP-39 in its original form: the turbocharger air intake on the left side of the fuselage and a smaller fin. Purges in wind tunnels made it possible to reduce its aerodynamic drag by licking the shape of the aircraft. The span of the roofs was reduced and the length of the fuselage increased. After the alteration, the designation changed to XP-39V. The air intake of the oil cooler was removed from the starboard side of the fuselage. Instead, air intakes were made in the leading edge of the center section. Pay attention to the wings of the nose landing gear. One leaf is fixed directly to the rack. Later, The design of the valves was changed. XP-39V. After blowing the XP-39 in the Naka full-scale wind tunnel, it became possible, on a strictly scientific basis, to improve the aerodynamics of the aircraft by relatively minor changes in its design. As a result of blowdowns, the wingspan was reduced from 35 minutes and 10 seconds to 34.0, and the fuselage length increased from 28 feet 8 inches to 29 feet 9 inches. They also reduced the height of the canopy and strengthened its cover. The air intakes were moved from the sides of the fuselage to the nose of the wing center section. New niche doors of the front landing gear were used. These innovations did not give a big effect in terms of improving the performance characteristics of the aircraft. The entire positive effect was leveled by the decision of the USARC command to remove the turbocharger from the aircraft. The military saw in the newcomer more of a ground support aircraft, and not a high-altitude interceptor. The dismantling of the turbocharger was accompanied by an engine replacement. A 1090 horsepower V1710-37 had to be installed. The first flight of the modified prototype, after modernization, the aircraft received the designation XP-39B, took place on the 25th of November, 1939. Despite the aerodynamic improvements, the maximum speed dropped to about 375 miles per hour. Bell received an order for the production of 13 pre-production YP-39 fighters. Number of built, PCS-1 armament, not installed, engine Allison V1710-37 power, HP 1090 maximum speed, miles per hour 375 miles per hour at 15,000 feet, climb 20,000 feet in 7.5 minutes. Service ceiling, foot 36,000 maximum flight range, miles 1,400 combat flight range, miles 600 wingspan, foot 34 feet length 29 feet 9 inches height 9 feet 3 inches empty weight 4,995 pounds gross weight 5,834 pounds max takeoff weight 6,450 pounds. The maximum capacity of the internal fuel tanks is 200 gallons. Maximum capacity of external fuel tanks. After blowing in wind tunnels, the configuration of the XP-39 has changed. The aircraft has acquired a cleaner external form. The carburetor air intake was moved to the fuselage behind the cockpit canopy. The location of the air intake did not change anymore, but its cross-section was increased. 13 YP-39 prototypes were used in flight testing. All aircraft flew in painted, bearing only the USARC markings, in 4 places on the wing, and the rudder was painted with horizontal stripes of red, white and blue. Like the XP-39B, the YP-39 prototypes had air intakes in the leading edge of the center section of each wing plane. YP-39 On the 29th of April, 1937, the USARC command ordered a batch of 13 YP-39 aircraft from Bell. One of these aircraft, the YP-39A, was planned to be equipped with a turbocharger, but this did not happen. All 13 aircraft were delivered without turbochargers. The aircraft received serial Army numbers from 40-27 to 40-39. The YP-39 was powered by the V1710-37 engine, the same as the XP-39B. The first pre-production aircraft was not armed, but most of the remaining 12 received armament: a 37 mm cannon, 2 heavy machine guns and 2 rifle-caliber machine guns were placed in the forward fuselage. The first YP-39 first flew on the 13th of September 1940 and was handed over to USARC on the 12th of October. The increase in aircraft weight associated with the installation of weapons led to a further drop in maximum speed 368 miles per hour at an altitude of 15,000 feet. All YP-39s were shipped and painted. Only on the fuselage, in front of the cockpit canopy, an anti-glare strip was applied with black paint. The rudder was striped, red and white, the standard coloring for American military aircraft of the late 30s and 1940 to 1941. Identification marks were applied to the upper and lower surfaces of the wing planes in 4 places symmetrically. There were no identification marks on the fuselage. On the lower surface of the wing, the inscription U.S. Army was made in large print in black paint. Number of built, PCS-13 armament, 137 mm cannon, 2 0.30 caliber machine guns, 2 0.50 caliber machine guns engine Allison V1710-37 power, HP 1090 maximum speed, miles per hour 368 miles per hour at 15,000 feet, climbed 20,000 feet in 7.3 minutes. Service ceiling 33,300 feet, maximum flight range, miles 1,000 combat flight range, miles 600 wingspan, foot 34 feet length 30 feet 2 inches height 11 minutes, and 10 seconds empty weight 5,042 pounds gross weight 7,180 pounds max takeoff weight 7,235 pounds. The maximum capacity of the internal fuel tanks is 170 gallons. Maximum capacity of external fuel tanks. This excellent image shows many details of the R-39C. An interesting point is that the landing gear legs are the color of steel, while the landing gear legs of later built aircraft were painted green. The front surfaces of the propeller blades are also the color of steel. The front support wheel has a smaller diameter disc and larger tires, compared to the wheels of the later Airacobras. Note the absence of wing machine guns. Gunsmiths replenished the ammunition load of two 12.7 mm and two 7.62 mm machine guns mounted in the nose of the fuselage of the R-39's fighter. The picture shows part of the ammo box of the right 7.62 mm machine gun. The ammo box of the 12.7 mm machine gun is located behind it. The R-39C aircraft were the only modification of the Airacobra with heavy machine guns in the fuselage. R-39's USART ordered the first batch of Airacobra in the amount of 80 cars. Initially, the aircraft received the designation R-45, but then it was changed to R-39C. Serial production of the R-39S began in 1940, but not 80, but only 20 fighters of this model were produced. The aircraft entered the 40th Pursuit Squadron of the 31st Pursuit Group for military testing. The group was stationed at Selfridge Field Air Force Base, PC, Michigan. Unlike the YP-39, the P-39C was powered by the V1710-35 engine, which had 6 exhaust pipes on each side. Armored glass was mounted on the inside of the canopy. The composition and placement of weapons have not changed. The P-39C aircraft were the first Airacobras to be painted according to the new scheme, olive green top and neutral gray bottom. Identification marks were also applied according to the new rules, on the sides of the fuselage, on the left wing console from above and on the right, from below. The black inscription U.S. Army on the lower surface of the wing is preserved. At first, the serial numbers of the aircraft were written in the nose and tail of the fuselage. In addition, the code 31P was applied to the fuselages with yellow paint, the designation of the 31st Group. At the end of 1941, the yellow code 31R was repainted in black. Not a single P-39S took part in the hostilities. They decided to emphasize the non-combat status of the aircraft by changing the designation from R-39C to RP-39C. Number of built, PCS-20 armament, 137 mm cannon, 2 0.30 caliber machine guns, 2 0.50 caliber machine guns. Engine Allison V1710-35 power, HP 1150 maximum speed, miles per hour 379 miles per hour at 13,000 feet, climbed 12,000 feet in 3.9 minutes. Service ceiling, foot 33,200 maximum flight range, miles 730 combat flight range, miles 450 wingspan, foot 34 feet length 30 feet 2 inches height 11 minutes, and 10 seconds empty weight 5,070 pounds gross weight 7,180 pounds max takeoff weight 7,300 pounds. The maximum capacity of the internal fuel tanks is 170 gallons. Maximum capacity of external fuel tanks. Starting with the R-39C, 2 large air intakes in the leading edge of the center section, 1 in each plane, were replaced with 4 smaller air intakes. Pay attention to the niches of the main landing gear completely closed by the doors. A retractable landing light is visible on the lower surface of the left wing plane. The P-39C was the first Cobra to receive the standard USART livery of a dirty olive top and neutral gray underside. Identification marks on the wing were applied asymmetrically. Most of the 20-built P-39S entered service with the 40th Fighter Squadron of the 31st Fighter Group, stationed at Selfridge Field, PC, Michigan. These aircraft were used for military and operational tests. They often flew with their weapons removed. Ground personnel roll into the P-39C parking lot, Salford Field Airfield. Squadron marking consisted only of applying yellow tail numbers to the sides of the forward fuselage and the code 31P of the 31st Pursuit Group on the keels. R-39S Airacobra INR 400. On the 30th of April, 1940, France ordered 200 Airacobra fighters. Germany defeated France before the Bell Company could deliver at least one of the ordered fighters. After the surrender of France, the order for 200 aircraft was added to the already ordered 475 Airacobra fighters by Great Britain. The British demanded to revise the composition and location of weapons, to replace the 37mm gun with a 20mm gun with an ammunition load of 60 shells, remove the synchronous rifle caliber machine guns, but install 4.303 caliber wing-mounted machine guns. All American fighters in the RAF received their own names. The P-39 intended to be rebaptized as the Caribou, but then they decided to leave the American name Airacobra. For their aircraft, the RAF command reserved the codes R-728, R-738, AP-266, AP-283, BW-100, BW-183, BX-135, BX-174. When placing the order, the British were confident that they would receive a high-altitude interceptor with a maximum speed of 400 miles per hour and a ceiling of 36,000 feet, that is, they were based on the original specification that the Airacobra was designed to. The Airacobra I had 1,150 horsepower V1710-35 engines without turbochargers, unlike the V1710-35 engines of the R-39C aircraft. The Airacobra I engines had 12 individual exhaust pipes on each side. Top speed was 367 miles per hour, not 400 at all. The first Airacobra I entered service with number 601 Squadron RAF. Acquaintance with the aircraft was marked by confusion in the minds of the pilots and their commanders. The aircraft, in terms of its characteristics, turned out to be completely different from what was expected. The RAF command cancelled the order, accompanying the refusal with an angry rebuke to the Bell designers. The British popularly explained to the designers what the removal of the turbocharger from the aircraft had led to. Protests are in the wrong place. At one time, representatives of the Bell Company tried to prove the need for a turbocharger on the Airacobra to the USARC command, but could not. Unlike Great Britain, the Airacobra was accepted with great enthusiasm in the Soviet Union. 212 Cobras from the British order entered service with the Red Army Air Force. As it turned out, these aircraft paved the way for thousands of later Airacobras. The first Airacobra delivered to the RAF. After the British abandoned the Airacobra, many aircraft from the British order entered the USARC, where they were assigned the designation P-400. A P-400 fighter from the 67th Fighter Squadron of the 347th Fighter Group is being prepared for takeoff, Guadalcanal. The aircraft was painted according to the RAF camouflage scheme. In the horrendous climatic conditions of Guadalcanal, technicians were forced to prepare aircraft for departures exclusively under camouflage nets, which at least somehow protected people from the scorching sun. On the eve of the U.S. entry into the war, the USARC command was concerned about the quantitative composition of the fleet of combat aircraft. 179 Airacobras from the British order entered service with the USARC, where they received the designation P-400. More than 100 Airacobra entered the Australian Air Force. The need for fighters in parts of the American aviation in the Pacific was so acute that the Cobras were not even repainted from British camouflage in the colours of the USARC. P-400 fighters, in particular, were in service with the 8th Fighter Group in New Guinea and Australia, the 35th Fighter Group in New Guinea and the 347th Fighter Group in Guadalcanal. Number of built, PCS 675 armament, 120mm cannon, 4 0.30 caliber wing machine guns, 2 0.50 caliber synchronous machine guns. Engine Allison V1710-35 power, HP 1150 maximum speed, miles per hour 358 miles per hour at 15,000 feet, climb 10,000 feet in 5.1 minutes. Service ceiling, foot 39,000 maximum flight range, miles 1,098 combat flight range, miles 600 wingspan, Foot 34 feet, length 30 feet 2 inches, height 9 feet 3 inches, empty weight 5,360 pounds, gross weight 7,380 pounds, max takeoff weight 8,200 pounds. The maximum capacity of the internal fuel tanks is 120 gallons. Maximum capacity of external fuel tanks 95 gallons. R-400. P-39D from the 39th Fighter Squadron of the 31st Fighter Group. The picture was taken at the base of the squadron, at the airfield Selfridge Field, PCS, Michigan. The marking of the aircraft is similar to the marking of the R-39C from the same squadron, except for the color code 31R on the fin. Instead of yellow, it is black. In addition, unit emblems were added to both cockpit doors. Lieutenant John C. Robertson leans out of the cockpit of a P-39D, Natchitoches Airport, waving in greeting. Louisiana. In late 1941, P-39Ds from the 39th Squadron, 31st Fighter Group took part in an exercise in Louisiana. P-39D, the last 60 aircraft of the first batch ordered by USAC, were built as P-39DBs. They were distinguished from the R-39C by the absence of synchronous rifle caliber machine guns, but 4.303 caliber machine guns were placed in the wing. That is, the machine gun armament scheme was similar to the Airacobra I. The installation of wing machine guns led to the strengthening of the wing structure and the organization of compartments for the placement of ammunition. The ammunition load of each wing machine gun is 1,000 rounds. In order to reduce the vulnerability of the aircraft, the P-39D was equipped with sealed fuel tanks and armor. A holder was mounted under the fuselage, designed to carry a 250 or 500 pounds bomb or an additional fuel tank. Engine, V1710-35 with 6 exhaust pipes per side, the same as on the R-39C. However, some aircraft received engines with 12 pipes per side. The P-39D-1B aircraft differed from the simple P-39D in armament. Instead of a 37 mm gun, there was a 20 mm gun. Most often, P-39D-1Bs were in service with P-400 squadrons, also equipped with 20 mm guns. Starting with the modification of the P-39D on the Airacobra, in each plane of the wing, a pair of 7.62 mm machine guns was placed. The outer machine gun was installed with a slight offset back relative to the inner one. In addition, it had a shorter barrel. Front view of the machine guns of the left wing plane. After the refusal to install 12.7 mm machine guns in the nose of the fuselage, the interior of the compartment on the P-39D has changed. In place of the machine gun, an oxygen cylinder covered with armor was installed. The 60 P-39DB fighters were followed by 705 P-39D-1B aircraft, which differed only in 20 mm guns instead of 37 mm. 158 P-39D-2B fighters were powered by V1710-63 engines with an horsepower 1,325 power. In the Pacific, many American fighter squadrons were simultaneously armed with the P-400, P-39D-1B and P-39D-2B. They became the first Airacobras to be baptized by fire as part of the USAC. Part of the P-39D aircraft entered service with the Red Army Air Force under Lend-Lease. Some P-39Ds of early construction were modified into photographic reconnaissance by installing K-24 and K-25 aerial cameras in the rear fuselage. The armor covered the oil and water coolers. 23 aircraft were modified into the P-39D-3B variant, 11 more into the P-39D-4B variant. Cartridge belts for wing machine guns were placed in narrow long boxes, 1,000 rounds per barrel. P-39D-1B from the 362nd Fighter Squadron of the 357th Fighter Group. Teachings in Tonopah, PCS, Nevada, spring 1943. P-39D fighter dashboard 1 altimeter 2 turn indicator 3 airspeed indicator 4 pressure indicator 5 hours 6 amateur 7 fuel consumption indicator 8 ignition 9 landing pressure indicator 10 temperature indicator 11 compass 12 altitude horizon 13 rate of climb indicator 14 roll and slip indicator 15 tachometer 16 engine control device 17 carburetor thermometer 18 oxygen system valve 19 fuel system pressure gauge 20 thermometer. P-39D-1. Number built, P-39D, PCS 60 number of built, P-39D-1B, PCS 705 number of built, P-39D2B, PCS-158 armament, 137mm cannon, on the P-39D1B and P-39D2B 120mm cannon, 4 0.30 caliber wing machine guns, 2 synchronous 0.50 caliber machine guns. Allison V1710-35 engine, P-39D and P-39D1B, Allison V1710-63, P-39D2B, power, HP 1150, V1710-35, 1325, V1710-63, maximum speed, miles per hour 368 miles per hour at 12,000 feet, P-39D, climb 15,000 feet in 5.7 minutes. P-39D, service ceiling 32 feet 100, P-39D, maximum flight range, miles 1,545, P-39D, combat flight range, miles 800, P-39D, wingspan, foot 34 feet length 30 feet 2 inches height 11 feet 10 inches empty weight 6,300 pounds gross weight 7,830 pounds max takeoff weight 8,200 pounds. The maximum capacity of the internal fuel tanks is 120 gallons. Maximum capacity of external fuel tanks 95 gallons, 175-gallon P-39D2B. The pilot's chairs on all versions of the Airacobra were the same. It is usually indicated that the P-39F fighters had 12 individual exhaust pipes on each side. Pictured is P-39F serial number 41-7246. It is easy to calculate that there are not 12 pipes, but 6. Is this the exception or the rule? The P-39F model fighters differed from the P-39D only in propellers with a diameter of 10 feet 4 inches. By the time production of the P-39F began, the landing gear began to be painted green. P-39F and P-39J. The P-39F variant was a further development of the P-39D, powered by the V1710-35 engine used in most D-modification aircraft, but on the motors of all P-39Fs there were 12 individual nozzles. The 37mm cannon returned to the forward fuselage. In place of the Curtiss electric propeller found on all previous Cobras, the P-39F received a 10 feet 4 inches Aeroproducts propeller. 27 P-39F aircraft were modified into photo reconnaissance aircraft similar to the P-39D3B and P-39D4B photo reconnaissance aircraft. Photo reconnaissance aircraft based on the P-39F received the designation P-39F2B. 244 P-39F fighters were ordered, 229 were built. The last 25 aircraft of the batch were equipped with V1710-59 engines with an automated control system. These fighters received the designation P-39J. A significant number of P-39Fs and P-39Js saw action in North Africa, the Aleutian Mountains and the Southwest Pacific. In flight, the P-39F is serial number 41-7224, with 12 exhaust pipes. Most likely, the really general rule for the P-39F was the presence of 12 individual exhaust pipes on each side. An interesting feature of this machine is that the number printed on the keel is duplicated on the side of the fuselage in the bow. The picture clearly shows the drawdown of the fuselage in the middle part. The last 25 aircraft of the P-39F modification were equipped with V1710-59 engines. These machines received the designation P-39J. Outwardly, they did not differ in anything, even in the number of individual exhaust pipes, from the P-39F. During his service in the 57th Squadron of the 54th Fighter Group, Lieutenant Leslie Spunts flew this aircraft. The squadron was based in Alaska. On the side of the fuselage in front of the cockpit door are marks of 3 victories in air combat. P-39F R-39K, P-39L, R-39M and P-39N. Initially, 1,800 P-39G fighters were ordered, but then the batch was divided into several series of aircraft of different models, P-39K, P-39L, P-39M and P-39N. These 4 variants of the Airacobra are known as the medium. The 210 R-39Ks built were powered by V1710-63-1, 325 HP engines optimized for low-altitude operation and Aeroproducts aircraft. The V1710-63 engine had 6 exhaust pipes per side. Ammunition for heavy machine guns was increased by 15 rounds per barrel. Aerial cameras were installed on 6 R-39Ks, after which the machines received the designation R-39K-1B. The P-39L modification fighters were manufactured in 250 units under one contract for the production of the P-39K. Curtiss electric propellers were installed on the P-39L, triangular vents appeared on the sides of the forward fuselage. The R-39L variant was the first Cobra with a new design nose wheel. The new wheel had a larger disc and a narrower tire, while the overall diameter of the wheel remained the same. 2 aerial cameras were mounted on 11 P-39Ls, photo reconnaissance ones were designated P-39L-2B. In flight, the R-39K is the first of the 4 medium Cobra models. Initially, the aircraft were ordered as P-39G, but in the end, instead of 4 modifications were obtained, not very different from each other. The fighters of the R-39M variant differed from the P-39L only in engines. They were equipped with V1710-83 engines with a power of 1,360 HP. Propeller, Curtiss Electric. 8 R-39Ms were upgraded to photo reconnaissance R-39M2B. The P-39N model became the most numerous of the medium modifications of the Airacobra. These fighters were built in 2,095 copies. In order to reduce the weight of the aircraft on the P-39N, the capacity of the internal fuel tanks was reduced to 87 gallons. However, the aircraft were equipped with kits that made it possible to restore normal in shear conditions 120-gallon internal tanks. The first 500 P-39Ns were designated P-39NBs, powered by V1710-85 engines and 11 feet 4 inches Aeroproducts propellers. The next 900 fighters were produced under the designation P-39N-1B. The diameter of Aeroproducts propellers on these machines was increased to 11 feet 7 inches. In addition, for better balance of the aircraft, the center of gravity was slightly shifted back. The last 695 fighters were designated P-39N-5Bs and had their armor removed, with a total mass of 38 pounds. Instead of transparent bulletproof glass, a small steel armor plate was placed behind the pilot's seat. On the basis of the P-39N, 2 variants of photo reconnaissance aircraft were produced. P-39N-2B, 128 aircraft converted from P-39N-1B, and P-39N-3B, 35 aircraft converted from P-39NB. P-39N fighters were widely used in the USARC and in the Red Army Air Force. They were also in service with the Free French Air Force and, after May 1943, Italy. Airacobras from the training unit. The picture was taken at an airfield located in the continental United States. A total of 240 R-39M fighters were manufactured. The instrument panel of the R-39M aircraft. A mechanic helps a pilot start a P-39L engine on a harsh, frosty day. Pay attention to the air vents in the nose of the fuselage, which have become standard for all later modifications of the Cobra. P-39L. Number of built, PCS 2095 armament, 137mm cannon, 4 0.30 caliber wing machine guns, 2 0.50 caliber synchronous machine guns. Engine Allison V1710-85 power, HP 1200 maximum speed, miles per hour 379 miles per hour at 10,000 feet, climb 15,000 feet in 3.8 minutes. Service ceiling, foot 38,500 maximum flight range, miles 1,250 combat flight range, miles 750 wingspan 34 feet length 30 feet 2 inches height 12 feet 5 inches empty weight 5,675 pounds gross weight 7,600 pounds max takeoff weight 8,200 pounds maximum capacity of internal fuel tanks is 87 gallons. Maximum capacity of external fuel tanks 175 gallons. The last of the 4 medium modifications is the P-39N. 2,095 aircraft of this variant were produced. Pay attention to the wheel of the nose landing gear, a large diameter disc and a narrow pneumatic. The first wheels of this type were installed on the P-39L. The dashboard of a P-39N fighter, photographed by Bell. Dashboards differed slightly from each other on the Cobras of different models. This P-39N was captured by the Germans as a trophy in early 1944. The tail number 71 is yellow, the serial number on the keel is painted over. The serial numbers on the keel, traditional for American aircraft, were usually painted over after the Cobras arrived in the USSR. P-39Q. The P-39Q is the last production model of the Airacobra and, at the same time, the most massive. 4,905 fighters of the Q modification of 8 production series were built. More than half of this amount was delivered to the Soviet Union, transferred to Free France and became an ally of Italy. The most important difference between the P-39Q and the aircraft of previous modifications was the dismantling of wing machine guns with the simultaneous possibility of suspension under the wing planes one by one container with a heavy machine gun. A large number of P-39Qs, especially in the Red Army Air Force, flew without wing-mounted machine gun containers. As on the P-39N, the P-39Q was equipped with V1710-85 engines with 6 nozzles on board. Aircraft of the first production series were designated P-39Q1B. 150 of these Airacobras had 87-gallon internal tanks. 5 aircraft were converted into P-39Q2B photo reconnaissance aircraft. Aircraft of the second series, P-39Q5B, 950 copies were made. The capacity of the P-39Q5B's internal tanks was 110 gallons. To reduce the weight of the aircraft, the thickness of the armor was reduced. 2 cameras were installed on 148 vehicles. The P-39Q6B photo reconnaissance turned out. The 705 P-39Q10B fighters had 120-gallon fuel tanks and reinforced armor protection. In addition, on the recommendations of Soviet specialists, a number of improvements were introduced on these machines, aimed at improving the performance of the aircraft in the winter. Automation of the power plant control has been introduced, in particular, the movement of the gas sector and the change in the number of propeller revolutions have been coordinated. 8 aircraft were converted into P-39Q11B photo reconnaissance aircraft. The next production batch is 1,000 P-39Q15Bs. These machines did not differ much from the P-39Q10B. Instead of 4 oxygen tanks, 2 were left. A small number of Cobras of all modifications were modified into a photo reconnaissance variant. As a rule, the cameras were of the same type. The arrow in the photo shows the photo equipment control panel. Photo equipment control panel. 2 cameras are installed in the lower part of the fuselage just behind the wing. Cameras, lower fuselage skin panel removed. On 891 P-39Q20B fighters, the composition of the onboard equipment has somewhat changed. 109 P-39Q21Bs were equipped with 4-bladed Aeroproducts propellers. Fighter model P-39Q25B built 700 pieces. Most of them entered service with the Red Army Air Force. On the P-39Q25B, the design of the rear fuselage and horizontal tail was strengthened. The latest production run is 400 P-39Q30Bs on these aircraft. Bell reverted to 3-bladed propellers. With the release of the last P-39Q30B, the serial production of the Airacobra was completed, the plant switched to the production of the R-63 King Cobra fighters, and the designers came to grips with the first American jet fighter, the R-59 Aircomet. The P-39Q was the last production variant of the Airacobra. Instead of 4 rifle-caliber wing machine guns, gondolas with one 12.7 mm machine gun were mounted under each R-39Q plane. In combat conditions, the gondolas were often removed. The dashboard of the P-39Q fighter. The picture is not the best quality. Besides, the engine control device was removed from the board. Little Hinx Jinx II P-39Q, which at the end of 1943 was based in Port Moresby. The first aid kit is fixed on the reverse side of the armored back, fighter P-39Q15B. On earlier Cobras, the first aid kit was attached to the inside of the left cockpit door. P-39Q fighters at Macon Airfield, Gilbert Islands, 1943. The picture is not very good quality, but it shows a rare Cobra P-39Q-25B with a 4-blade propeller. Such screws were installed only on the P-39Q-21B and P-39Q-25B. Almost all of these machines were delivered to the Soviet Union. Close-up of the gas sector, the panel of electrical controls with an ammeter is visible. A close-up of the underwing gondola with a 12.7 mm machine gun. The gondola was installed on the P-39Q instead of two 7.62 mm wing machine guns. As in the United States, several Cobras were upgraded in the Soviet Union into a two-seat training version of the R-39. After the end of the war, the USSR handed over 2 Cobras to the Poles for testing for the choice of fighters for the country's Air Force. People's Democrats settled on the Yak-9. The starboard side of the P-39Q pilot's cockpit, photographed through the open left cockpit door. The control knob is painted black, but the paint has peeled off a lot. Number of built, PCS 4905 armament, 137 mm cannon, 4 0.50 caliber machine guns. Engine Allison V1710-85 power, HP 1200. Maximum speed, miles per hour 385 miles per hour at 15,000 feet. Climb 15,000 feet in 4.5 minutes. Service ceiling 35,000 feet. Maximum flight range, miles 1,100. Combat flight range, miles 650. Wingspan, foot 34 feet. Length 30 feet 2 inches. Height 12 feet 5 inches. Empty weight 5,645 pounds. Gross weight 7,700 pounds. Max takeoff weight 8,350 pounds. Maximum capacity of internal fuel tanks 120 gallons. Maximum capacity of external fuel tanks 175 gallons. 2 P-39Qs were received by U.S. Navy aircraft. These aircraft were designated F2L1K according to the fleet's aviation coding system. Due to the small capacity of the internal fuel tanks, an additional fuel tank was often hung under the fuselages of the Cobra, most often with a capacity of 75 gallons. The tank was mounted on a standard bomb rack. P-39Q fighters from the 362nd Fighter Squadron, 357th Fighter Group, Haywood Field, PCS. California, 1943. Adjustment of the airborne weapons of the P-39Q fighter. As a staff officer in the 357th Fighter Group, a P-39Q-1B fighter with his own name Saga Boy 11 was flown by Colonel Edward S. Chickering. This is the second P-39Q-1B to roll off the assembly line. A trio of P-39Q zebra-painted aircraft. Fighters painted in this way were used in the USA as training. In exercises, they usually acted as an adversary. TR-39, P-39Q, 3X P-39E prototypes were built with different wings, stabilized by jamming and rudders. According to some sources, a laminar wing was tested on the XP-39E, which was later used on the XP-63 King Cobra fighter. However, well-known photographs refute this version. Most likely, the information refers to two XP-39E, converted XP-63. The first 3 prototypes were indeed used to test the design solutions of the King Cobra, but not the laminar wing. At first it was supposed to equip the prototypes with Continental V1430 engines, but Allison V1710-47 engines were installed. The fuselage had to be lengthened by 21.3 inches to accommodate the turbocharger. It was assumed that the aircraft would go into production under the designation R-76, but the serial production program was cancelled. All models of the Airacobra and the R-63 King Cobra fighter were equipped with various versions of the Allison V1710 engine. A variant of the Allison V1710 engine with 6 twin tailpipes per side, there was a variant with 12 individual tailpipes. Pay attention to the round section of the nozzle cut. The engine was connected to a long shaft gearbox installed immediately behind the propeller. The picture clearly shows how the gun was mounted. Left view of the engine of the P-39N fighter, the fuselage panels have been dismantled. The rear of the Allison V1710 engine, right side view. The oil tank is located in front of the battery in the very nose of the fuselage. Access to the engine was provided by 2 removable panels from the right and left sides of the fuselage. A small consumable fuel tank is fixed in front of the cab. Fighter P-39N from the collection of the museum in Chio, PCS, California, restored to original condition. The reload handles of heavy machine guns are clearly visible. They are painted red. The interior of the cockpits of the P-39 and P-63 fighters manufactured by Bell were painted green. In the picture on the left, the gas sector is clearly visible. The inner surface of the left door of the cockpit, the color is green. Since it is extremely difficult to open the door against the flow of incoming air during an emergency exit of the aircraft in flight, the Airacobra was provided with an emergency reset of both cabin doors. The inner surface of the right door of the cockpit, the color is green. There is a pocket for flight cards on the door. On the pocket flap there is an instruction for retracting the landing gear and flaps. The design of the nose landing gear is simple, but strong and reliable. Pay attention to the small niche flap fixed to the top of the rack. The niche is closed mainly by narrow doors fixed on the sides of the niche. The posts and the inner surfaces of the doors and niches are painted green. On the early versions of the Cobra, the strut and strut were not painted. There were no side consoles in the Airacobra cockpit. The controls were mounted directly on the floor on the sides of the pilot's seat. Large male pilot's seat. Note the different color of the seat belts. The interior of the Airacobra cockpits from the museum in Chino, left view. A rudder mounted on the seat cup is used to adjust the elevator trim tab. Cabin space of the fuselage is used for mounting the radio station. The type of radio station changed depending on the modification of the R-39 fighter and the theater of operations in which the aircraft was operated. The right segment of the cockpit canopy can be folded up along the longitudinal axis, providing access to the radio equipment. The nose of the fuselage with the skin removed, rear right view, P-39N aircraft from the museum in Chino. Detail of the 37mm gun magazine. The oxygen tank is painted bright yellow. The battery is painted red, but in reality it was black. The interior surfaces are painted in the same way as the interior of the cabin, in green. Left side view of the forward fuselage of a P-39N from a museum in Chino. Close-up of the nose wheel. The Cobras of the first issues had wheels with small diameter discs and relatively large pneumatics. Later, starting with the P-39L, they began to install wheels with large discs and narrow pneumatics. Thrust cleaning release of the nose landing gear. Bottom view of the niche of the front landing gear. Interior view of the fore main landing gear. The rim of the wheel is silver, the strut and the inner surface of the strut are green. Front view of the left main landing gear. Left main landing gear wheel well interior, note stiffeners, linkage and inner sash. Interior view of the right main landing gear. Easily confused with the left support. Rear view of the right main landing gear, note the hydraulic wiring to the brakes and the sash attachment to the strut. The interior of the niche of the left main landing gear. Close-up of the right main landing gear well. Part of the niche, which is located in the center section, is painted green. Part of the niche in the detachable wing plane is bright yellow. Interior of the wheel well of the right main landing gear. General view of the Airacobra cockpit, port side. Externally, the cockpit remained virtually unchanged on all production models of the Airacobra. Pay attention to the window in the side glazing of the canopy. The visor was often splattered with oil, which limited the forward view. In this case, the pilot opened the window. The windows in the cab doors were lowered and raised as in a conventional car. Pilots often used the right door to access the cockpit. The radio equipment of the P-39Q fighter is clearly visible through the glazing at the rear of the canopy. The part of the 37mm gun barrel protruding from the spinner of the propeller was often covered with a casing. The barrel has never been closed with a 20mm casing. The forward part of the fuselage smoothly passes into the spinner of the propeller. Starting with the modification of the P-39L, one large air vent appeared in the front of the fuselage on each side. Pay attention to the hole in the side of the fuselage, which serves to lift the aircraft. Left side vent. A spring-loaded plate closes the hole for ejection of spent machine gun cartridges. Just below and in front of the cockpit door, the imprint of the aircraft is marked on the fuselage, type, affiliation, serial number. Front view of the carburetor air intake located behind the cockpit canopy on the upper surface of the fuselage. Pay attention to the horizontal plate in the air intake duct. The rear part of the fuselage with the skin removed, top right view. A spherical object is an engine oil tank, painted in silver. The radio antenna mast is also visible. The mast is made of wood. The flap drive is electric. The electric drive for extending the flaps is installed in the center section of the right plane. Thrust of cleaning release of flaps of the left plane. Radio equipment is installed not only in the cockpit, but also in the fuselage. The picture was taken from the port side. The access panel to the compartment was removed. A through hole in the tail section of the fuselage is designed to lift the aircraft. Pay attention to the white antenna input on the upper surface of the fuselage. The air intakes of the oil cooler and the engine radiator are located in the leading edge of the center section of the left and right wing planes. The flap of the right plane in the extended position. Aircraft P-39N from the collection of the museum in Chino, PCS, California. Standard for most American aircraft during the Second World War, the air pressure receiver was installed on the Airacobra in the leading edge of the left wing plane at the very tip. Aileron skin, linen. There are trim tabs and balance plates on both ailerons. Pictured is the left aileron. Right aileron. The lower part of the fuselage, between the niches of the main landing gear, with the skin panel removed. This is where the oil cooler is located. The barrels of the wing machine guns are covered with steel casings. The toe of the wing is also sheathed with steel at the place where the machine guns are installed. Wing machine guns were placed on the Airacobra modifications P-39D, P-39N. Cartridges were ejected through 4 holes on the lower surface of the wing plane. The picture clearly shows the holes for the ejection of spent cartridges. A standard bomb rack is mounted centerline under the fuselage. It can carry bombs up to 500 pounds caliber or an additional fuel tank. Aeronautical lights are located on the upper and lower surfaces of the wingtips. In the picture there is a red light on the left plane. On the right plane there is a green light. Filler neck of the wing fuel tank. As a rule, the caps of the necks were painted red. Green navigation light on the right wing plane, lower surface of the plane. Note the 3 identification lights that are only on the lower surface of the right wing plane. Color of lights, front to back, red, blue green, amber. Retractable landing light, holes for ejection of spent cartridges are also visible. Bottom surface of the left plane. In the foreground is a red air navigation light, round glass is a retractable landing light. Notice the aileron hinges. The surface area of the vertical tail is 7.9 square meters ft. The keel is slightly turned to the left to compensate for the turning moment created by the rotating propeller. The maximum chord length of the vertical tail is 43.875 inches, height is 44.52 inches. Approximately at half the height from the stabilizer to the upper edge of the keel, there is a white navigation light, in the picture, under the horizontal crossbar of the number 7. Lights are located on both sides of the keel. Plating of a rudder of a linen. Rudder area 11.07 square feet, including the area of balancing surfaces. Maximum rudder deflection angles plus 30 degrees. Rudder trim area minus 0.37 square ft, trim angles plus 20 degrees. The elevator is also lined with canvas. The total area of the elevator is 16.22 square meters ft. Deflection angles, up 35 degrees, down 15 degrees. The trimmer area of the left elevator is 0.86 square feet, deflection angles plus 20 degrees. The total area of the 2 halves of the stabilizer is 23.9 square meters ft. The stabilizer is installed with a positive angle of attack of 2.25 degrees. Stabilizer span 13 feet, maximum chord including stabilizer 52.25 inches. 2 XP39E prototypes, serial numbers 41-19511 and 41-19512, were converted into XP63 prototypes. They were equipped with laminar wings, V1710-47 engines with 6 exhaust pipes on each side and 4-blade propellers. The first flight on the first XP63 was performed by Bell's senior test pilot Robert M. Stanley on 7 December, 1942. The second prototype flew on 4 March, 1943. Both aircraft were destroyed during flight tests. One XP63A was built, serial number 42-78015. Unlike the XP63, the XP63A had a V1710-93 engine with individual exhaust pipes, 12 per side. With a top speed of 426 miles per hour, the XP63 is rightfully one of the fastest fighters in the world. The first production model of the King Cobra was the modification of the P-63A. A total of 1,725 R-63A aircraft of 7 production series were built. Starting with the P-63A 6B model, underwing hardpoints for 500-pound bombs or external fuel tanks were mounted on aircraft, pictured. Like the P-39Q, the King Cobra provided for the possibility of hanging containers with heavy machine guns under the wing, but the shape of the containers was different. In addition, on the King Cobra the shape of the air intakes in the wing roots was changed. In the toe of the center section of each plane there was one large section air intake instead of 2 smaller ones. The R-63A fighters did not have the ventral fins typical of the R-63C modification. Note the L-shaped air pressure receiver under the left wing plane. On some King Cobras, the PVD rods formed a right angle, but on most the rack had a slight tilt back, while the receiver itself was located parallel to the aircraft's construction axis. Most of the P-63A and later King Cobra variants that entered service with the USAF were not painted at all. In the picture, R-63A-9B. Note the slope of the air pressure receiver post. 5th R-63A-1B built in flight. The picture was taken during military testing of the fighter. The first production P-63A was painted dirty olive on top and neutral gray on the bottom. R-63A. The first production version of the King Cobra was the R-63A variant. A total of 1,725 R-63As were built in 7 production batches. All of them were equipped with Allison V1710-95 engines with a 2-stage turbocharger. The propeller was 11 feet 7 inches in diameter, an inch larger than the propeller of the XP-63 prototype. On 50 R-63A-1B aircraft were 37 mm M4 guns with 30 rounds of ammunition. The ammunition load of 2 synchronous .50 caliber machine guns was 270 rounds per barrel. Ammunition of wing-mounted heavy machine guns, which were suspended under the plane in containers, also 250 rounds each. Aircraft P-63A-5B made only 20 copies. They differed from the fighters of the first series by the presence of additional armor protection and radio stations of a different type. All these aircraft were delivered to the Soviet Union and did not have wing-mounted machine gun gondolas. Most of the King Cobra entered service with the Red Army Air Force. The picture shows R-63A-10B of the Soviet Air Force. In the Red Army, King Cobras were widely used to strike at ground targets. The aircraft were delivered to the USSR in the standard American livery, dirty olive top and neutral gray bottom, with yellow serial numbers written on the vertical tail. Identification marks were applied, as a rule, back in the USA, red stars in white circles. However, there were instances with the standard identification marks of the Red Army Air Force, red stars with a white border without any circles. Hanging tanks were most often painted with silver or not painted at all. Pay attention to the radio compass loop antenna located on the upper surface of the fuselage behind the cockpit. King Cobras from the USAF did not take part in the hostilities, they were used for advanced training of fighter pilots. As a rule, these aircraft did not have 37mm guns, and many had no weapons at all. Pay attention to the yellow painted fuselage noses and the large side numbers of the R-63A-7B trainers. Assembly of R-63A fighters, intended for shipment to the Soviet Union, at the Bell plant. Identification marks, red stars in white circles. The picture shows well the casings of the barrels of 37mm guns protruding from the spinners of the propellers. The tail assembly has not yet been installed, so the serial numbers of the aircraft are written in chalk on the sides of the forward fuselage. King Cobras were distilled to the USSR by Soviet pilots along the route Orsib, Alaska, Siberia. Stalin's Falcons received aircraft in Alaska. 5 R-63A-9B fighters were converted into RP-63-12B target aircraft. They dismantled weapons and armor protection. Instead of standard armor, thicker armor was supplied. The aircraft RP-63-12B serial number 42-69654 was originally painted in yellow-orange with a black anti-reflective stripe in front of the cockpit canopy. Pay attention to the disappeared air intake behind the cockpit. In 1948, the RP-63-12B aircraft was renamed QF-63FDT. The same aircraft, but instead of a tail number, pinball is written on both sides in the forward fuselage. Pay attention to the reserve PVD under the right wing plane. Starting with the P-63A-6B, King Cobras began to mount holders under the wing for 75-gallon additional fuel tanks or bombs up to 500 pounds in caliber. The standard ventral holder, however, was preserved. A total of 130 R-63A-6B aircraft were manufactured, followed by 150 R-63A-7B aircraft. Beginning with Series 7, the King Cobras destined for the USAF were delivered and painted, while the aircraft for the Red Army Air Force continued to be painted in dirty olive and neutral gray. The span of the horizontal tail was increased by 16 inches, and the elevator cord was increased by 2 inches. 200 P-63A-8B fighters received water injection devices and new Aero products propellers with a diameter of 11 feet. The R-63A-9B differed from the R-63A-8B only in the presence of additional cockpit armor. The last series is R-63A-10B, 730 of them were built and almost all of them were sent to the USSR. Instead of the 37mm M4 cannon, these King Cobras had cannons of the same caliber. The ammunition load for the cannon was increased to 38 rounds. The gun was equipped with an N9 electric sight. The first man-target aircraft for the USAF were converted from P-63A-9B. 5 aircraft were converted to P-63A-11B targets by installing thicker airframe skins and revising the armor scheme. Weapons, systems for injecting water into engine cylinders and equipment for hanging additional fuel tanks were dismantled from the aircraft. Target aircraft were completely painted in a bright orange-yellow color for better visibility. The first targets were followed by 5 RP-63A-11Bs and 95 RP-63A-12Bs. These 100 aircraft were converted from P-63A-10Bs. Number of built, PCS 1725 armament, 137mm cannon, 4 0.50 caliber machine guns, engine Allison V1710 93/95 power, HP 1325 maximum speed, miles per hour 410 miles per hour at 25,000 feet, climb 25,000 feet in 7.3 minutes, service ceiling 43,000 feet, maximum flight range, miles 2,200, combat flight range, miles 450, wingspan, foot 38 feet 4 in length, 32 feet 8 inches height, 10 feet 6 inches, empty weight 6,375 pounds, gross weight 8,800 pounds, max takeoff weight 10,500 pounds, maximum capacity of internal fuel tanks 126 gallons, maximum capacity of external fuel tanks 325 gallons. Again in the picture RP-6312B serial number 42-69654. Now the aircraft is not yellow, but the color of unpainted duralumin. The name Pinball is the common nickname for all King Cobras. Another target aircraft, RP-6312B serial number 42-69647 frangible SAL. In the flight of the King Cobra, gondolas with large caliber machine guns are suspended under the wing. The shape of the underwing machine gun nacelle of the King Cobra was more streamlined compared to that of the P-39Q's Airacobra nacelle. Underwing heavy machine gun, gondola removed. Official photo of the dashboard of the R-63A aircraft. R-63A. R-63A. RP-63A. Fighter P-63C-5 re-prepared for delivery to the Soviet Union. The ventral keel is clearly visible in the profile picture taken. The only two-seat R-63C aircraft received the designation TR-63C. Cockpit interior to the right of the pilot's seat 1 carburetor heating control, only on P-63IB, 2, oxygen supply tube to the pilot's oxygen mask 3 hot air supply pipeline for cabin heating 4. Pilot seat belts 5. Identification lights control panel 6. Seat belts 7. Toggle switch for control of the hot air cabin heating system 8. External load release handle 9. Landing gear retraction landing gear handle R-63S. The second and last serial modification of the King Cobra is the R-63C. A total of 1,227 R-63S were manufactured in 2 production batches. The aircraft of the 2 series had a number of minor differences between them. 215 R-63S-1B were built first, then 1,012 R-63C-5B. All R-63Cs were powered by V1710-117 engines, and the aircraft differed from the R-63A by the presence of a ventral fin. Most of the P-63S under Lend-Lease received the Soviet Union. 300 aircraft, Free France. The French used the P-63S during the Second World War to patrol the airspace of North Africa and Italy, and in 1948 in combat operations in Indochina. 200 R-63Cs were upgraded into RP-63C-2B manned targets. Target aircraft based on the R-63S did not have ventral fins. Number of built, PCS 1227 armament, 137mm cannon, 4 0.50 caliber machine guns, engine Allison V1710-117 power, HP 1355, maximum speed, miles per hour 410 miles per hour at 25,000 feet, climb rate 25,000 feet in 8.6 minutes. Service ceiling, foot 38,600, maximum flight range, miles 2,100, combat flight range, miles 320, wingspan, foot 38 feet 4 in length, 32 feet 8 inches height, 12 feet 6 inches, empty weight 6,800 pounds, gross weight 8,800 pounds, max takeoff weight 10,700 pounds, maximum capacity of internal fuel tanks 128 gallons, maximum capacity of external fuel tanks 225 gallons. The upper part of the dashboard and the front part of the left side of the cockpit. Image from Aircraft Maintenance Manual 1, Door Opening Handle 2, Window 3, Gas Sector 4, Fluorescent Lamp 5, Emergency Door Release Lever 6, Sound Signal for Retracting Extension of the Landing Gear 7. Warm Air Supply Pipeline for heating the canopy 8, Parking Brake 9, Toggle Switch on the Sight 10, Control Knob 11, Sight 12, Fluorescent Lamp. Control Handle and Right Cab Door 1, Control Knob 2. A12, Oxygen Supply Regulator 3, Emergency Oxygen Supply Button 4, Landing Gear Retracting Release Handle 5, External Load Release Handle 6, Door Opening Handle 7, Door Glass Up Down Handle 8, Topographic Map Pocket. Cabin Interior, Port Side 1, Control Knob 2, Fuel Supply Valve 3, Anti-Icing System Switch 4, External Ventral Release System Handle 5, Trim Control 6, Handle for external load release from the central pylon 7, Elevator Trim Control 8, Rudder Trim Control 9, Emergency Release of Underwing and Loading 10, Seat Belts 11, Shoulder Harness. 200 R-63C-1B aircraft were upgraded into manned target aircraft and received the designation RP-63C-2DT. They were similar to the RP-63A. The remaining RP-63Cs in 1948 were converted into QP-63C-2B unmanned targets. R-63S, P-63F, RP-63G, 13 P-63E fighters under the designation P-63E-1B were built before receiving an order for 2,930 P-63E aircraft. These machines were designated P-63E-5B. The R-63E-1B was equipped with V1710-109 engines. In addition, they had a wing different from the wing of the R-63A and R-63C aircraft. The same wing was fitted to the only P-63D built. Only 2 P-63Fs were built in total. They were distinguished from the R-63C only by a narrower vertical tail and the V1710-135 engine. The picture shows the first of 2 P-63Fs built. The second aircraft was serial number 43-11720. The last manned target aircraft based on the King Cobra is the RP-63G. A total of 32 such machines were made. They were distinguished from the RP-63C by the 1,425 HP V1710-135 engines. An experimental RP-63G with serial number 45-57300 was fitted with an experimental V-tail. Despite good test results, the unusual plumage on the King Cobra did not take root. The nose strut of the King Cobra landing gear has slight differences compared to the strut of the Airacobra landing gear. The most noticeable externally is a two-link. The wings of the landing gear niche of the nose support of the chassis of the King Cobra are identical to the doors of the niche of the Airacobra chassis. The interior of the front of the nose landing gear niche. The counter is painted green, the interior of the niche is yellow. The black fuse panel is located on the rear wall of the nose gear well. Front view of the left main landing gear. Interior of the niche of the right main landing gear. Wheel well of the left main landing gear. Unlike the Airacobra, the King Cobra did not install internal niche doors. Left main landing gear, inside view. The rack is painted green, the wheel rims on both sides are silver. The interior of the chassis niche and the inner surface of the sash are yellow. Close-up of the top of the right main landing gear leg, viewed from the inside. Right main landing gear, left front view. Right main landing gear, inside view. Pay attention to the hydraulic brake line wiring. Many King Cobras, especially intended for shipment to the Soviet Union, had a ratchet on the propeller hub, which allowed the engine to be started from an auto starter. Propeller blade. Imprint data and the Aeroproducts logo were applied to each blade. On the lower surface in the nose of the fuselage is a capped oil tank vent. The picture clearly shows the hatch for ejecting spent cartridges from a machine gun. There is a similar hatch on the port side. The cockpit of the King Cobra is very similar to the cockpit of the Airacobra. Below the door on board is the official aircraft specification. Directly behind the door is the filler cap of the ethylene glycol tank. Front mount of the tension radio antenna. The carburetor air intake has a rectangular section instead of the oval one on the Airacobra. Top view of 12 individual exhaust pipes, starboard side. Section of the center section with the sheathing sheet removed. The cover of the connector for connecting to the onboard network to the ground source of electricity is open. The voltage of the onboard power supply of the King Cobra was 24 V. Section of the lower surface of the center section of the left wing plane. Through the air intakes in the socks of the center section, air was supplied to the oil cooler and the engine radiator. Note the small triangular air intake. Air ducts are painted black on the inside. An additional fuel tank is suspended under the fuselage. Tanks with a capacity of 64 or 75 gallons could be hung on this node. Rear view of the external fuel tank. The open flaps of 3 oil coolers are also visible. One air navigation light is installed at the edges of the right and left wingtips, a completely different ANO installation than on the Airacobra. The identification lights of the King Cobra do not differ from the lighting devices of a similar purpose on the Airacobra. The air pressure receiver was mounted on the lower surface of the left wing. Instead of a retractable landing light as on the P-39, the King Cobra had a fixed landing light in the toe of the left wing plane. The simple deflectable flap of the King Cobra was fundamentally different from the flaps of the Airacobra. The picture shows a deflected right flap. The maximum deflection angle is 45 degrees. The skin of the ailerons of the King Cobra is metal, not cloth like on the R-39. Aileron trimmers were available only for the P-63CIB and P-63C5B aircraft. In the toe of the right wing plane, a camera of a photomovie gun is installed. Deviated right flap. Flap drive, electric. On the R-63A, the height of the rudder is the same as the height of the keel. After installing the ventral fin on the R-63C fighter, the total height of the vertical tail became greater than the height of the rudder. The rudder cover is linen. The trimmer drive is located on the left. Below the trimmer on the rudder is a white drill fire, fastening the tension radio antenna to the keel. The ventral fin of the R-63C fighter was introduced to improve directional stability. Bottom view of the elevator. Pay attention to the trim drive. The trim tab is only on the left elevator. An adjustment plate is installed on the right elevator instead of a trim tab. The skin of the ailerons of the King Cobra is made of metal, but the skin of the rudders is linen. The dashboard of a P-39N fighter from the Yanks Aviation Museum. The armament compartment of the R-63A fighter, which Frank Borman flew. Most of the 20 P-39C fighters built entered service with the 31st Pursuit Group. These were the first Airacobras painted in the standard scheme of dirty olive tops and neutral gray bottoms. The aircraft were marked USAAC pre-war. P-4YU of Lieutenant Zed Fontaine of the 347th Fighter Group. New Caledonia, April-May 1942. The aircraft was painted in RAF earth green camouflage scheme. P-39D-1B Lieutenant I.A. Erickson of the 35th Fighter Squadron, 8th Fighter Group, Mill Bay, New Guinea, 1942. P-39 of Lieutenant Leslie Spunt of the 57th Fighter Squadron, 54th Fighter Group. The 54th Group was stationed in Alaska from June to December 1942. The group's aircraft operated over the Aleutian Islands. The P-39Q-1 Tarawa Boomdeet fighter was flown by Major Joseph X. Powell of the 72nd Squadron, 21st Fighter Group, Mariana Islands, 1944. P-39N Major V.F. Sirotina, Air Force of the Red Army 1944. The King Cobras delivered to the Soviet Union were painted according to the standard scheme for USAF aircraft, a dirty olive top and a neutral gray bottom. As a rule, the serial number written in yellow paint is retained on the vertical tail. Free French Air Force P-39Q fighter. GCII-6 Roussillon, 1944. The aircraft of this French unit performed several flights to patrol the coast of North Africa. P-63C King Cobra from GCII-9 Auvergne, Indochina, 1949. On the restored P-63 King Cobra fighter, which is now stored in Chino, PC, California, once flown by astronaut Frank Borman. Pay attention to the quality of the restoration. Not only the details of the nose section of the fuselage with weapons are reproduced, but also the inscriptions on the shells for the 37mm cannon. The bow armament compartment of the King Cobra with the skin panels removed. The power structure of the fuselage in the bow compared to the Airacobra is changed in order to facilitate the maintenance of the gun and machine guns. There is no horizontal stringer. Oxygen cylinders are located in the very forward part of the bow compartment on both sides. The cannon and machine guns on the King Cobra were located in the same way as on the Airacobra, but otherwise the layout of the forward fuselage compartment was completely changed. View through the rear segment of the King Cobra cockpit canopy. The radio is clearly visible. There is an oil tank between the machine gun barrels. Getting to the oil tank on the King Cobra is much more convenient than on the Airacobra. The interior of the nose compartment of the fuselage is painted bright yellow. The picture clearly shows the cartridge box of the Wright 12.7M machine gun. The pilot's seat of the R-63A King Cobra fighters. General view of the dashboard of the R-63 King Cobra fighter. It is very similar to the dashboard of the P-39N Airacobra fighter. Green cab interior. The inner surface of the left door of the cockpit of the R-63A fighter. Dashboard King Cobra large TAM. Pay attention to the absence of handles for manual reloading of machine guns. The left side of the cockpit King Cobra. Continuity with the cabin Airacobra is obvious. The inner surface of the right door of the cockpit of the R-63A fighter. The pocket for topographic maps is clearly visible. Cabin interior R-63A seat dismantled. Notice the bright red fire extinguisher. Thank you for downloading the book from the royalib.com free library, http://royalib.com. Leave a review about the book, http://royalib.com/comment/Ivanov S/R39_Airacobra_modificati_Detali_Constructii.html. All books by the author, http://royalib.com/author/Ivanov_S.html.